Vice Provost, Professor Florence Ling, colleagues, students, and friends. Good evening, and thank you for being present here today. It's with great pleasure that I welcome you all to the public lecture by Professor Venkat Subramanian of Columbia University, who is currently the Nian Kongsi Distinguished Visiting Professor, hosted by RC4. Firstly, let me extend my warmest thanks to Nian Kongsi for their support in bringing outstanding academics from the best places in the world to NUS through this Distinguished Visiting Professorship scheme. I would like to acknowledge the warm support of NUS senior management in facilitating such academic interactions. In particular, the encouragement from Vice Provost Professor Florence Ling in the nomination, selection, and approval process have been phenomenal. Thank you, Professor Ling. My RC4 colleagues, specifically Dr. Srinivas, Yu Cheng, Pi Fan, and Bi Chun, deserve huge credit for many aspects related to Professor Venkat's stay here. I know Professor Venkat for the last 32 years. It's a different matter that he knows me only for the past 12 months. In any case, as a senior high school student in India, I came across an article in a leading national newspaper that featured the work Venkat was doing in the United States then, and it mentioned the word artificial intelligence. Since then, I have been following his research and have been greatly influenced by those works, as has the rest of the process systems engineering community around the world. As a pioneer and thought leader, Venkat has deeply influenced the field over the past 3 decades and some more. You will see the impact of his work through his publications, the awards and recognitions that have followed, and the key positions through which he has served the process systems engineering community. The event poster and the registration site contains the details, and I shall therefore not go into that now. Over the past 25 years, I have seen him at conferences, and for me, it has been admiration from a distance. It may have ended that way, but luckily for me, Venkat decided to write a book on income inequality. This book used a lot of concepts from Professor Venkat's first love, namely physics, and his third love, game theory. I leave him to specify what his second love is. The topic piqued my interest, and I read the book fully, and I loved it, despite understanding it only partially. Typically, love reaches a maximum when we know enough, but not everything. Whether the curve stays flat or climbs upwards or rapidly falls upon receiving additional knowledge depends on a few things. Whatever be that, I hit upon the idea of inviting him here under the Nian Kongsi Distinguished Visiting Professorship. My record with proposals and grant applications has been pathetic all the years I've been here, so I was not sure. But the outstanding quality of Venkat's research and accomplishments worked its magic against all odds, and the rest, as they say, is history for RC4. Venkat taught a senior seminar module at RC4 in the special term, and the classes concluded this Tuesday. By all indicators, the students seem to have enjoyed it, me included. My love for the ideas contained in the book have only increased. I'm going to say a little bit more, and hopefully this does not put additional pressure on him as he begins his presentation. In my interactions with Professor Venkat, I have found him to have a deep knowledge of many areas, ranging from physics to chemical engineering to economics to complexity science to the history of science to music to religion and spirituality. He can combine these domains with ease and inspire interesting conversations. I have to confess something to Venkat here. Whenever you are free, I created many opportunities so that I can walk with you for reasonably long distances or go with you on the bus or MRT as opposed to taking a taxi ride, so that I can hear you talk for long about anything. It was not in the interest of your health or mine or the environment's. I have always found him to be an amazing, fact-driven, first-hand, experience-based storyteller. I would consider this 6-week association with him as my most memorable experience as an academic. Thank you, Professor Venkat, for sharing your wisdom on many things. I do not wish to prolong your anticipation of his talk any longer. On behalf of you all, it is my pleasure to welcome Venkat to deliver his public lecture. Professor Venkat, please.
Thank you. Well, after such a build-up, I'm really nervous to talk. Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for coming. I would like to thank Laksh for that very kind and generous and I think greatly exaggerated introduction. It's very kind of him. I also would like to thank Professor Ling and the other folks at the NUS management for selecting me as the Neon Kongsi Distinguished Visiting Professor, and also the Neon Kongsi Charities for providing this support. I'm also grateful to Bichun and others in RC4 who have made the entire process. I was initially hesitant because I knew there's always a lot of paperwork involved with these things. These days I try to avoid, whenever I can, filling lots of forms about where I have been in the last 10, 15 years and that sort of thing. But she made the whole thing so effortless, and I was amazed how quickly things moved. So I'm very grateful to RC4, the back office, and also the I think it's called the Ministry of Employment or something like that, where I had to go and get a work permit, and it was done in a matter of minutes. So I had imagined what it might have been like in New York City. I was dreading something like that, but I was so pleasantly surprised that in the extra time I had, I took a boat ride in the Singapore River. So I had planned a whole day for this, and then I was out in half an hour, and I said, let me go on a boat ride. So it turned out to be, overall, it's been a really enjoyable experience. And one thing I was marveling, just today, I listened to a wonderful lecture by another visiting professor here, Professor Helmer Aslaksen, who spoke on cultural astronomy, and in particular today's talk was the role of time and calendar in Indian astronomy and Indian culture. So there I was sitting in a room, I'm an American citizen of Indian origin, sitting in a room full of Singaporeans, listening to a lecture on Indian calendar system by a Norwegian mathematician. So where else can this happen? If every country behaved like this, I think the world will be a wonderful place. So, after all that build-up, so let me say something about the topic of today, this evening. So before I jump into the details, I would like to actually first dedicate this lecture to all my teachers. We call them as acharyas in Indian tradition. And because I have benefited enormously from them, both living and dead ones, as it turns out. And as Isaac Newton remarked, I've really had the pleasure and privilege of standing on the shoulders of giants. In particular, this particular one, Professor James, whom I had never met, but his papers on entropy inspired me to do the work which I'm about to present to you guys. And like I said, both living and dead teachers have been my guides over the years. I also would like to acknowledge the students and collaborators I've had the pleasure of in this project. In particular, Yu Luo, who was my PhD student at Columbia, has an interesting connection to NUS because he got his undergraduate degree here in 2011 in chemical engineering, and they came to Columbia and then worked with me for my PhD. Professor Sethuraman, who is the chair of IUOR at Columbia, he collaborated with me on the game theory part, and then some of the students shown here at our celebratory lunch at Columbia. Cindy Lay and Doris Hay, who worked on some of the programming aspects, and then my student Abhishek Shivaram, who's right here, and also Dr. Laya Das, who was here a couple of weeks ago, and Rashmi Suresh, who were my postdocs. So, income inequality and wealth inequality are of great concern these days as you follow various news items. And here is a statistic. This is for the US. The top 1% share of the wealth has increased from a low of 20% in 1976 to 42% in 2012, approaching 50% in recent years. And their income share similarly has risen from 13 to 18, approaching 20. Whereas if you look at the share of the top 90%, bottom 90%, they have been gradually going down over the years. And another metric of concern, similarly, is the what is known as the CEO pay ratio. This is the ratio of the total compensation package of a CEO of a Fortune 500 company, say in the US. These numbers are for the US. And divided by the salary of an average employee. In the US, it used to be around 20 in the 60s. In recent years, it is well over 300, in some cases even approaching 1,000. And so all these things have created a lot of angst all over the world, and certainly in the US, the Occupy Wall Street movement was kind of triggered by these kind of trends. And the World Economic Forum identified income inequality and the wealth inequality as the #1 challenge in 2015, ahead of climate change, which was actually ranked #2. So these are certainly seen as major challenges for the next 20, 30 years. And in fact, these are the challenges for the younger folks in this audience. Now, this chart expresses the same thing in a slightly different way. If you look at, and this is again for the US, if you look at the productivity growth and then the compensation that the bottom 90% kind of received, if you look at the post-Second World War years, from 1948 to 1973, roughly 25 years, they were pretty much on top of each other. As the productivity improved, the people at the bottom also got more and more salary, and then it was right on top of each other. Then see the break here. This is 1973 is when the oil crisis kicked in. Then came the deregulation and the free market era under Reagan's presidency and others. The productivity, the people at the bottom, where they were continuing to be productive, pretty much at the same rate. So it's more or less going up. So the GDP kept increasing, but the share of the GDP that the bottom 90% got pretty much flattened out in the last 40 years in the US. And similar things are there for other Western democracies. So this is part of the big problem behind Brexit. This is the problem behind the current politics in the US. And remember the trickle-down economics? That's how this was sold around 1980. Oh, no, as this thing grows, you guys will be pulled up too. This was known as the trickle-down economics. And the mantra was the rising tide lifts all boats. But it turned out that the rising tide lifts only all yachts. And the productivity gains were mostly captured by the top 10%, particularly by the top 1%. And so the top 1%'s income grew by so much, whereas the bottom 90% during the same period was pretty much flat. And here you see the bottom 90% share of the income, which was about 70% in 1980. In the last 40 years, it has steadily declined. And the top 10% share steadily increased. And in fact, this is a zero-sum game at any given time. So whatever these guys gained, that came out of that. And then now we are actually approaching, or we might have just crossed the 50% point, where half of all the income in the US goes to the top 10%. So naturally, this can lead to all kinds of troubles, and that's what the concerns are about. It affects the economic growth because the aggregate demand goes down because the bottom 90% don't have the money to buy cars or refrigerators or whatnot. So that, they don't have the money to spend. As a result, the demand goes down. That's what is known as the aggregate demand. And then as a result, the economy doesn't grow as fast as it could. So the growth slows down. And we have seen that in the last 20 years in the US. Efficiency also goes down because once only a few people control everything, crony capitalism sets in, and so stifling competition. Equality or opportunity goes down because of limited access to education, healthcare, justice, and so on and so forth. And finally, excessive money concentration leads to concentration of political power. And an example of that is that just a few hundred families controlled half the money in the 2016 election, and it may, and it's likely to be the case in the next one, that's next year in the US. So all these things damage the moral fabric of a free market, capitalistic, democratic society because people lose faith in the system. They think things are rigged against them, and so they begin to lose faith and trust, and these things can lead to instabilities. Okay. Now, should economics be concerned with morality? I mean, generally morality is a study of philosophers and maybe theologians. And if you take any course in economics, whether it's an introductory course or an advanced course in any university, in pretty much anywhere in the world, you would rarely come across the terms morality and fairness. They'll teach you all kinds of things about various mathematical models and microeconomics, macroeconomics, this and that. Morality will rarely figure in. Okay, so the general sense in modern or mainstream economics is that we have nothing to do with morality, and that modern economic theories have generally avoided discussing morality and fairness. But consider this statement. So let me read from here. What improves the circumstances of the greater part can never be regarded as an inconveniency to the whole. No society can surely be flourishing and happy, of which the far greater part of the members are poor and miserable. Okay? Or this statement, all for ourselves and nothing for the other people, seems in every age of the world to have been the vile maxim of the masters of the mankind. Who said these things? You might think Karl Marx, maybe? Comrade Lenin? It sounds like something that would have come from a socialist or a communist, but as someone chimed in from the audience, it's from Adam Smith, the patron saint of free market capitalism. Before he wrote his famous Wealth of Nations, he actually wrote 20 years before that the theory of moral sentiments. He was really a moral philosopher. Adam Smith was deeply concerned about the effect of free market and whether it will benefit everybody and so on and so forth. So that's Adam Smith from 200 years ago, but modern philosophers like Tim Scanlon, who recently retired from Harvard, who also published a book last year, Why Does Inequality Matter?, makes a very compelling and deep argument connecting morality to the issues in economics. He says, but the objections to inequality that I have listed in his book and his essays rest on a different moral relation. It's the relation between individuals who are participants in a cooperative scheme. Those who are related to us in this way matter morally in a further sense. They are fellow participants to whom the terms of our cooperation must be justifiable. He's basically saying the society works because we all cooperate and we all decide to get up in the morning and show up for work and do our bit. And that cooperation must be justifiable in their own, if the system is rigged against me, why should I get up in the morning and go there and then clear garbage or drive trucks or do whatever that I do? He goes on to say, in our current environment of growing inequality, can such a justification be made? No one has reason to accept a scheme of cooperation that places their lives under the control of others, that deprives them of meaningful political participation, that deprives their children of the opportunity to qualify for better jobs, and that deprives them of a share in the wealth they help to produce. If the bottom 90% stop working, all societies will collapse, and the billionaires will have no place to go. And he concludes saying, these are not just objections to inequality and its consequences, they are at the same time challenges to the legitimacy of the system itself. The holdings of the rich are not legitimate if they are acquired through competition from which others are excluded and made possible by laws that are shaped by the rich for the benefit of the rich. So what Scanlon is saying is, if you have a rigged system like this, then the wealth accumulated by the Forbes 400 is illegitimate. Basically, he's saying it's stolen money. It's stolen from the bottom 90%. And the bottom 90% is beginning to feel that way, by the way. Now, it says in these ways, economic inequality can undermine the conditions of its own legitimacy. So if you don't have a legitimate system, then the whole place falls apart. Now, my Columbia colleague and a Nobel laureate, Professor Joseph Stiglitz, has similar observations. He has his own books. This one came out just a few months ago. Of all the costs imposed on our society by the top 1%, perhaps the greatest is this: the erosion of our sense of identity, in which fair play, equality of opportunity, and a sense of community are so important. It is the sense of unjust system without opportunity that has given rise to the conflagrations in the Middle East. The top 1% have the best houses, the best educations, the best doctors, and the best lifestyles. And there is one thing that money doesn't seem to have bought, and an understanding that their fate is bound up with how the other 99% live. Throughout history, this is something that the top 1% eventually do learn too late. I mean, he's talking about pitchforks and torches and 1812, you know. So this is not only the concern of just professors and philosophers. Here is an op-ed from a member of the 1% class. Okay. I'm scared. The billionaire hedge funder Paul Tudor Jones, who lives in New York City, is scared. My friend Ken Langone, a founder of the big American chain Home Depot, is scared. So are many other chief executives. Not of Al-Qaeda or the vicious Islamic State or some other radical, evolving radical group from the Middle East, Africa, or Asia. We are afraid of where income inequality will lead. And this is an op-ed in New York Times a couple of years ago. So, so you can see that this whole business of fairness and inequality and morality of markets and stability of societies, they're all closely intertwined. They're all different facets of the same problem. Yes, fairness is a tricky concept, and it is messy to deal with. But you cannot ignore it because it is inconvenient, as mainstream economics has ignored it for the last several decades. Recent research in behavioral economics suggests that people do care about fairness. There are all kinds of behavioral experiments that people have done which show that people indeed care about fairness. And, you know, it's not just inequality they care about fair inequality. People are willing to live with inequality as long as it's fair. Now that gets tricky, particularly how to model it mathematically, and that's what I attempted to do, and that's what I'm going to present to you. Okay. So like I said, the mainstream economics has largely focused on efficiency and growth, and which are absolutely vital, absolutely important, no question about it. But there are only two pillars of a three-pillar system. The third pillar is fairness, which we have ignored. And this sentiment is captured by this Nobel laureate in economics from Chicago, Robert Lucas, who said, of the tendencies that are harmful to sound economics, the most seductive and in my opinion, the most poisonous is to focus on questions of distribution. Now, once a Nobel laureate makes a statement like this, which young or aspiring economist is going to touch fairness with a 10-foot pole. It'll be committing career suicide because if asking such questions is considered to be unsound and harmful and in fact indeed most poisonous. Okay, there's no way you're going to get tenure if you're going to work on these kind of problems. And that's why it needed an engineer to look at this problem. I'm not an economist, so I'm not worried about what these guys say. Okay, so I said, let's ask the hard questions. Let's not shy away from them because they're inconvenient. Let's ask questions such as how much income inequality is fair in a free market society? By the way, what is fair inequality? Can we even define it mathematically? And what income distribution we ought to see in an ideal free market society? And can we develop a mathematical theory to address these normative questions quantitatively? So these are the kind of things I tried to do, and that resulted in the book and what we are going to see in today's lecture. Now, inequality per se is not bad. Why? Because typically in a society, different people have different talents, different skills, different capacities for work, and so they make different contributions, some more, some less. And so they ought to be compensated unequally. Those who contribute more should be compensated more. For example, if John works for 1 hour and earns $100, and let's say Lily works in the same job, produces similar quality of work for 2 hours, and she makes $200. So is there income inequality? Sure there is. John's paycheck was $100 and Lily's is $200. But is that inequality fair? Of course it is. Lily got more because she contributed more. So once you adjust for their contributions, they were both compensated equally. That is, on a per hour basis, they both got the same amount, $100 per hour. So both John and Lily are paid the same effectively once you account for their contribution. So their incomes are not equal but equitable. This is exactly what I mean by fair inequality. So, and people get this. People intuitively understand this. In all these surveys and all these various discussions, this comes through. They are not opposed to inequality. They are opposed to the unfairness in the system. Now, that was a very easy example, but how do we apply that kind of an idea to an entire society, a free market capitalist society with millions and millions of agents, people buying and selling goods and services, and they all have different talents, skills, and capacities for work? So this leads to questions such as, is there a measure of fairness in a free market society? Or is there an income distribution that ensures the same effective economic reward that we saw in the John Lilly example? By the way, I chose the name John because that is the most common first name for American CEOs, as it turns out. And Lily Ledbetter is the woman who fought for equal pay for equal work, and that law was passed by Obama. And so that's why those names were chosen. So given the complexity of the free market, you would think answering those questions would be impossible. And the answer is possibly no. And most people think so. But surprisingly, the answer is yes. And not only that, in that process, we answer at least a 200-year-old open question in economics and political philosophy: how much income inequality is fair? So before I get into the math of this, let me take a step back and talk about this from a political philosophy perspective. Basically, there are two fundamental political philosophical frameworks in discussing what constitutes a fair and just society. One comes from the Harvard philosopher John Rawls, who taught there in the 60s and 70s and 80s, who wrote a famous book, Justice as Fairness, advocating an egalitarian framework. Rawls founds his fair society on two fundamental principles. One is the liberty principle, where he says everyone enjoys the same set of basic liberties. The second principle, called the equality principle, has two components. One is the fair equality of opportunity. The other one is the economic part, which he called the difference principle, that concerns with distributive justice. That is, how do you share the income and wealth that a society creates jointly through this cooperative scheme that Scanlon, another Harvard philosopher, talked about. So Rawls said it is okay to have inequality in the system, in the society, as long as it benefits the people at the bottom. So it's okay, some people make more, some people make less, as long as the people at the bottom are not suffering. And so this is what is known as the maxi-min distribution. So Rawls was primarily concerned about outcome fairness. That is the society organized in such a way that the outcome is fair for everybody? Now that requires a strong state to enforce fairness. Now disagreeing with Rawls was another Harvard philosopher in the same department down the corridor, Robert Nozick, who also was there at that time. Both are no more now. He wrote also an equally well-known book, Anarchy, State, and Utopia, and he advocated a libertarian philosophy where this was free market based. He said, let's create a free market system which has a level playing ground. And as long as the free market functions properly and the rules and regulations are properly applied equally to everybody, then whatever that market produces is fair by definition. So whatever income distribution that naturally comes from such a free market is fair. So he was concerned about procedural justice and process fairness. Okay. Now neither Rawls or Nozick inform us what that fair income distribution would be. Rawls doesn't say what it would be in his egalitarian framework, and Nozick doesn't say what it should be or it would be in his libertarian framework. In quantitative terms, they just talked about the qualitative features these societies should have. And this is where my work comes in, where I try to answer these questions quantitatively, which means we have to bring in some math. And before we do that, basically the ideas that are applied come from, as Laksh alluded to at the opening, that a society can be viewed as a dynamical system comprising of many agents interacting with one another. And so as a result, one can actually bring in ideas from system theory, game theory, information theory, and also statistical mechanics. So what I propose is a new mathematical theory of a fair society, which integrates all these concepts from systems engineering and physics and game theory with political philosophy and economics. And so now let's get into the technical details. So I'm going to assume an ideal free market to start with, as we do in many modeling situations. So large number of employees, large number of companies. So there is no particular market power or rent seeking. There is no reasonable availability of skills at all levels. There's no biases of any kind. But this theory is not valid for small startups and entertainment figures such as sports stars and so on. So now let's do some math. Okay, but I assure you that there are only a couple of slides with some equations, and knowing the equations is not crucial to understanding the rest of the analysis, but they help. So now in this ideal free market environment, consider a company which makes computer chips. Let's call it Chipsaurus. Let's say 1,000 employees work, and they have a salary budget of $100 million. So the average salary is $100,000. Now, different employees make different contributions. Let's say the janitors clean and keep the premises clean, and secretaries answer phone calls and schedule appointments and so on. Chip designer engineers are designing computer chips, and the marketing folks are bringing in new orders. Accounting and finance people are mending the books, and the corporate, the senior executives have a winning strategy to gain market share and keep the profit growth going and all that. So different people are making different contributions, some more, some less. And so they're all making different salaries. But suddenly the board of directors have a revelation, and they all think about this fairness and justice and all that, and they declare, okay, from tomorrow onwards, we are going to have an egalitarian approach to this. Everybody is going to be paid the same salary. Okay, right from the janitor to CEO, we're all people. It's the same blood that goes through all of us and all that. So the income distribution basically is just a line. It's what is known as a delta function in math. So at $100,000, everybody's there. Nobody's making less, nobody's making more. This has the perfect Gini coefficient of 0. Sociologists would love that. So this looks great from a social justice perspective, but clearly from an economic perspective, you can imagine people crying, this is unfair. So who are those people? Those are the people who should be on the right side of this distribution, such as the senior chip designers and the marketing VP, CEO for sure, the general counsel for the company who fights all the IP battles. All those people are going to protest this unfairness in pay, and they'll say, we're going to leave because we can get higher salaries in other companies in this environment. And they all threaten to leave. Now, if they all left, the company will collapse. So despite its noble intentions, Chipsaurus will have to shut its door the next day. And so in order to survive, it simply will have to meet their salary demands. Whatever salaries they're getting from the outside, they have to meet. So this no longer stays as a straight line. It begins to spread to the right. Okay. So, but what happens to these people, say the janitors and secretaries who are making $100,000? Now, they are not going to complain. Okay, they are not protesting. They are getting unfairly high pay. Okay, so they're all quite happy. But janitors and secretaries in other companies in that city will hear about this. Hey, they are paying $100,000 for the janitor. I'm making only $30K here. So they will call up Chipsaurus and say, guess what? You don't have to pay me $100K. I'm making 30. Pay me 35, I'll come and work for you. So this competition from the outside will come, and these people will offer to work for less because they are still getting a pay rise. And that means this company, Chipsaurus, will look at their secretaries and say, I'm sorry, folks, I'll have to let you go because I'm going to replace you with all these people. And they all need a job, and they'll say, no, don't fire us, we'll take a pay cut. And so the distribution begins to spread to the left also. So this naturally raises a whole bunch of interesting questions. One is, will the self-organizing dynamics ever settle down, or will this keep spreading or oscillating or something? Remember, this whole thing is self-organized. Nobody is telling any of these secretaries or chief designers, you should stay, you should leave. They all make these decisions entirely on their own. This is this ideal free market. There are no frictional losses. They are not worrying about, well, if I switch jobs, I have to go to another part of the city. The schooling is different there for my kids. None of those frictional things are considered here. Those things can be accounted for later on in the theory. So will this settle down? If it reaches an equilibrium distribution, what is it? What are its conditions? And then finally, is that equilibrium distribution fair? Okay, so these are the questions we should answer now. Surprisingly, there are no answers to any of these questions in modern, mainstream economics. And one has to bring in ideas from the outside, as it turns out. And one of that is to, first of all, to consider what is the economic utility of a job. When we work, whether you teach in a university or work for a company or you run your own, what is the utility of work, economic utility? I argue that it really has two components. One is it pays the bills that you have now. You get a paycheck that takes care of your rent, food expenses, and whatnot. And the other one is actually the utility of a better future in the following way. See, you work at this company for 2 years. You hope, I'll pick up some new skills and experience and maybe some connections. I'll get promoted right here in this company with a higher salary, or I'll go some other place with a higher salary. Then I'll work there for 3 years and pick up some additional skills and techniques, and then I'll get promoted. So this job leads, it's a path to a better future, to upward economic and social mobility, and to a better future. And so that there is utility in that. So the utility that we derive from a job is the present utility of the paycheck, and then this future utility of this possibility of improved or improving quality of life. I model this in this equation that H sub I is that utility from a job, and then it has three components, U, V, and W. U is the utility from the paycheck, W is the future utility, V is the disutility. Since I have a negative sign, that tells me it is the disutility of work. This is basically means to earn that paycheck, you have to show up at work. I have to get up in the morning, make a 1-hour commute, work with a boss you may not care for, and things like that. There is a cost associated with this benefit. Okay, remember that, but this H accounts for the effort or contribution, that is that V term. And that turns out to be important, as you'll see. So now let's see whether we can put some more math behind these terms. So what is the utility of income? What's the utility of a paycheck? And this is a problem that's been solved roughly more than 200 years ago. This is how much is a resource worth to you? So how much $1 million worth? To me, it's a lot of money. To Bill Gates, he won't even notice it if somebody swiped $1 million from his bank account. So this is what is known as the property of money or many resource, diminishing marginal utility. That is, the more you have, the less valuable it becomes. So it kind of tends to saturate. So it has this kind of a feature. And a typical way to model that is what is known as the logarithmic function. If you plot log of salary, it will move like that. And alpha is some constant parameter I'll talk about later. So we took care of U. How about V? Now, it turns out that if you look at the cost-benefit trade-offs, that is, if you compute the net benefit of anything, take the benefit and then subtract the cost from it, initially that net benefit increases. In this case, the net benefit from higher salary increases as the salary increases. You're living in bigger houses, you're in a better neighborhood, the kids go to better schools, and you have better vacations and so on. But in order to earn that income more and more, higher and higher salaries, you have to work harder and harder, and you end up making lots of sacrifices. You work long hours, maybe weekends, you travel a lot, you miss time with your family and friends, your health takes a hit, and so on and so forth. So the costs keep going up also, but also they keep up, usually they go faster, and such that the net benefit then begins to come down. Most things in life have this inverted U profile. For example, if you have a very serious headache, you might take 1 Tylenol and that helps. And if you take 2 Tylenols, you feel actually pretty good. But you can't use that logic and project, if I take 20 Tylenols, I'll be cured instantly. You take 20 Tylenols, you're back in the hospital with serious liver damage. Similarly, if you jog for a half an hour a day, they say that it's good for your health. If you jog 1 hour a day, it's even better. If you jog 10 hours a day, unless you are an athlete from Kenya, you have destroyed your knees. So most things in life, as some resource increases, initially the benefits increase, but then eventually they come down because with that benefit, there is a cost that keeps going up rapidly, and that brings you down. So most things in life have this kind of cost-benefit trade-off. And this implies that V has to go like square of this log. I'll skip the details of that mathematical reasoning, but that's the net result. So we've got 2 terms down. We are left with only one. This is the future benefit. Let's say that you're a freshly minted law school graduate from NUS. You are hired as an associate at a Tony law firm here, along with a whole bunch of others. And then the first day you show up for work, the managing partner of the law firm comes and tells you, we're doing great stuff, this is it's an important activity for the society, you'll all make a lot of money. And by the way, one of you will make partner in 7 years. Typically in big law firms, the success of becoming a partner is about 2 to 3%. And it usually takes 7 to 8 years. And once you become partners, you make $2 million for the rest of your career, let's say. So what is that future utility worth? Well, any employee's chance of winning that partnership is 1 over n, where n is your competition, all the other associates who joined with you. If $Q million is the total value, then the expected value is divided by that. And then the utility goes always as the log of that because of the diminishing business. And this basically means the W term will go like the negative of log n. Okay. So putting all these things together, I have U, V, and W. So I have this equation. So this is my utility equation. This is the utility you get from a job, and it is characterized by the salary and then the competition, where alpha, beta, gamma are parameters that weight these individual terms, and they can be different for different people. But I'm starting with an ideal society where everybody has the same preferences. Alpha, beta, gamma are the same. So I have a one-class society or a classless society. If there is only one class, then there is no class. This can be relaxed to 2 and 3 class societies, which are more realistic, and then I discuss all those things in the book. But the most important thing to realize here is that this is the effective utility that has already accounted for the contribution. The contributions are in these 2 negative terms. Okay, so now the question comes, is there a fair income distribution? Now based on the John Lilly example, we said a fair income distribution is one where the economic reward is the same for everybody after you account for their contributions. John made $100, Lilly made $200. You shouldn't look at just 100 and 200 and say, oh, there is inequality. No, you have to see what they put in. John put in 1 hour of work, Lilly put in 2 hours of work. Once you adjust for that, they were both compensated at the same thing. That is what we define as fair inequality. So that logic tells me, since this is accounting for the contributions already, a fair distribution is one where this H should be the same for everybody. Okay. So is there a fair income distribution? How would we recognize it? We'll recognize it if the H is the same for the janitor and the secretary and the chip designer and the marketing folks and the CEO. And so this is similar to the John Lilly example. Salaries won't be equal, but they are equitable, okay? Because everyone gets the same effective economic reward, which is same HI. Now the 2 important questions come up now. Is there such an income distribution with constant H? And secondly, can the free market find it? To do that, we have to appeal to game theory. This is the branch of mathematics which talks about strategic interactions between agents. So if you know about probability theory, that came out of studying games of chance, such as playing, dice, throwing dice, or some simple card games. And great mathematical names such as Bernoulli, Laplace, Poisson, and all these people who developed probability theory presumably spent a lot of time in casinos. They were gambling their time. So that's probability theory. Now game theory came out of studying the math behind games of strategy. Probability theory came out of games of chance. This came out of games of strategy such as chess or prisoner's dilemma. And it's more recent. Probability theory is roughly 200 to 300 years old, and game theory roughly started in the 40s formally through the work of von Neumann and Morgenstern. So you have a set of strategically interacting players, and each player executes the best possible strategy that maximizes his or her payoff or utility while considering what the opposition or his competition, her competition might do. So the idea here is to predict what strategies will be executed by the players and what outcomes are likely. And there is a particular version of game theory called non-cooperative games, where John Nash, who was more or less immortalized in this movie and book, A Beautiful Mind. I don't know how many of you have seen it. It's a beautifully written book also, actually written by a Columbia colleague. Sylvia Nasser is a professor of journalism at Columbia, and Russell Crowe does an amazing job as John Nash. So John Nash proves in 1950 that in such a game, you will reach equilibrium. And now we call that equilibrium as Nash equilibrium. And this is the one-page paper that Nash published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences in the US. Even though it appears to be in 2 pages, it's really 1 page long. The paper starts here, and it ends there. That one-page paper was his PhD thesis. So I tell all my graduate students, you can do a lot in 1 page. Not only he got his PhD, he won the Nobel Prize for it. 44 years later. In between, as you all know, he had severe mental issues, and then he dropped out of sight. He was in mental asylums for nearly 2 decades, and then miraculously came out of it, and so on and so forth. So it's an inspiring story, no matter how you see it. So it is Nash who comes to help, to our rescue here. So using Nash's framework, we can show, remember we asked the question, will this self-organizing dynamic, will it ever settle down, or will it reach equilibrium? It turns out, using Nash's ideas, that there exists a quantity called a potential, which the gradient of the derivative of that is our utility, which we just derived, that there is a unique Nash equilibrium when phi is maximized. So we answered the first question that will this ever reach equilibrium? Yes. When phi is maximized. But what is phi? Phi is basically integral of this. And since I know what h, I can compute what phi is. So I won't torture you with those details. But the key insight here, as it turns out, is that that potential turns out to be the same as entropy in statistical mechanics. Now, this is a very surprising and deep connection that people did not know about. And by maximizing the potential, what you're doing is really maximizing entropy in statistical mechanics. Now, so what is entropy? Now, this is entropy has terrorized people for now 150 years. Every student in this audience who has taken an undergraduate course in chemistry, physics, or thermodynamics would certainly attest to that. So entropy was a concept that was invented or discovered to explain the following problem. So if you take a whole bunch of molecules, gas molecules, and put them in one half of a cylinder and put a hard constraint such as a diaphragm, and when you remove the diaphragm, automatically all the molecules, within a fraction of a second, they will distribute themselves more or less uniformly everywhere without any help from us. They will do it on their own. This is what is known as spontaneous equilibrium. But one never sees, well, one sees this happen. You can do this experiment a million times, and every single time you'll see this. But you never see this happening. That is, they all collapse into one half of the chamber by themselves. Okay? This is sort of like if you fill up a balloon with air and then tie with a string, the air stays inside. Once you remove the piece of string, oof, the whole air escapes. But leave an empty balloon on a table and wait for all the air to rush in and then it balloons up. You'll have to wait beyond the lifetime of the universe. That never happens. And this was the biggest puzzle between 1800 and 1875. For about 60, 70 years, this was the biggest puzzle because this is central. This was at the dawn of the Industrial Revolution, and the people were trying to design better steam engines to power Industrial Revolution. They were trying to understand the behavior of the thermodynamics of such machines, and this problem was at the core. Because according to Newton, a molecule can go from here or from there to here with equal probability. There's nothing stopping a molecule go from here to there. And similarly, all these molecules can decide to go to the other side. According to Newton, there is nothing stopping them. But it never happens. So this puzzled people for, like I said, 60, 70 years until this fellow, Rudolf Clausius, a German physicist, who came along and said, well, folks, there is another new concept we have to create, and that he called entropy. And it's a measure of the randomness in the system. By going from here to there, the system is going from a low state of randomness to a higher degree of randomness. But to go from there to there, it is going from higher degree of disorder to lower degree, and that will never happen on its own. That's how entropy was explained. And so statistical equilibrium is reached when you maximize disorder or maximize randomness. And other people, I mean, such as Gibbs at Yale and Boltzmann at Vienna made important contributions. But entropy in economics has always been a really worrisome concept. There have been many attempts in the past, in the last 70, 80 years, maybe even 100 years, not very successful, because we know that free market works best when there is more order. So why would I want to maximize disorder? So that was the conceptual problem. Why would you want to maximize disorder or uncertainty, which is what you're doing by maximizing entropy? So this was a major conceptual block. Now, so much so that Paul Samuelson, who won the Nobel Prize in economics, a giant in economics, taught at MIT, said this in his Nobel lecture: there is really nothing more pathetic than to have an economist or a retired engineer try to force analogies between the concepts of physics and the concepts of economics. How many dreary papers have I had to referee in which the author is looking for something that corresponds to entropy or to one or another form of energy? Now, in my defense, I'm not an economist and I'm not a retired engineer, so I think I'm legally I'm not the one he's talking about. But you can see, like Lucas, who poo-pooed issues of fairness and distributive justice as poisonous activities to do in research, and Samuelson said, looking at economic, connections between economics and physics and entropy is really, it's pathetic. Amartya Sen, also a Nobel laureate, he said, given the association of doom with entropy in the context of thermodynamics, it may take a little time to get used to entropy as a good thing. How grand entropy is on the increase. So when these Nobel laureates are saying such things, again, no self-respecting economist is going to touch any of these topics because that would be the end of his or her career. But let's examine entropy a little more closely. So what happens from here to there and there to there is basically when you look at the probability of any molecule on this side when there is a diaphragm, on the right-hand side is 0 and left-hand side is 1 because there is no molecule there that can never get there. But once you remove the diaphragm, what is the probability of finding any molecule on the right half? 0.5. On the left half, 0.5. Okay? So equilibrium is reached when all accessible parts are equally likely to be occupied. So basically, equality of the probability is really the idea behind maximizing entropy. And so, for example, if I were to say once I remove the diaphragm, the probability of left half is 0.6 and 0.4, you would say that's unfair. What makes you decide that one is higher than the other when you have no reason, no information to do so? You would say the only fair assignment is 0.5, 0.5. So you can see the connection between entropy and fairness. By maximizing entropy, you're really maximizing fairness of probabilistic assignment. So entropy is really a measure of fairness. Now, once you realize that, the conceptual problem goes away because when you're maximizing entropy, you're not maximizing disorder, you're maximizing fairness. Now, we know that our markets work well when everybody feels they are getting a fair deal. If you're going to be treated unfairly in a store, you'll never go there. Markets will fail if everybody feels that they're going to get screwed. So then that's the end of a free market. So you can see intuitively fairness is at the foundation of market economies. And in fact, that's why, for example, in the US we have the Securities and Exchange Commission or FTC to punish unfair practices such as insider trading, collusion, because these are all considered unfair. So you can see the strong connection between fairness and free market and now entropy. And so fairness is the essence of entropy, and this is something people have not recognized in all these years, either in physics or in information theory. So now that we have proved that this reaches equilibrium, but what is that distribution? Well, we just got that help from Nash, that you maximize potential, which is same as maximizing entropy, which turns out to be same as maximizing fairness. You will get your distribution, and that turns out to be the log normal distribution. Most of you will be familiar with the normal distribution. This is known as the bell curve, which is symmetric. The red one is the one we get. It's asymmetric. This is what is known as log normal. That is the equation form. Okay, so this is the equation you get at distribution you get at equilibrium. And then the entropy analysis tells us this is the fairest distribution you can have. But we had another criteria for fairness, which is this John Lilly example. We said that everybody should have the same age. That is the fairest distribution. So for log normal, what is the age? This is the salary the janitor makes, and these are the salaries of the engineers and the senior VPs and CEO, let's say. Let's compute age at each one of those locations. It turns out to be exactly the same everywhere along the distribution. So by this logic of John and Lilly, everybody is rewarded equally in effective utility terms. That is, after you account for their contributions, everybody gets the same reward, which is H. H is the same. That doesn't mean the salary is the same. Just like in the John Lilly example, the salaries are not equal, but they are equitable. This is what we mean by fair inequality. Okay, so how does this theory perform in practice? Since I know the log normal is the ideal distribution we should have in a properly functioning free market society, I can now compute the income shares of the top 1%. Remember, the first slide I showed what the income share was the top 1% and the bottom 90% and so on. I can compute them now and see what they ought to be for these three tiers. And then from that, I compute a measure of the inequality in the society, the psi, which basically compares the actual income share you get divided by the ideal share minus 100%. If they are the same, then psi would be 0. If the actual share is more than the ideal share, psi will be positive. If it is less, it will be negative. Okay, so let's see how this applies to real societies. Okay, now first of all, remember I'm considering a homogeneous class-free society where the society looks more or less the same everywhere. When you go visit the country, people look pretty much the same everywhere. Okay, that is the kind of society I'm looking at. That is what in physics that would correspond to what is known as an ideal gas model, such as helium and argon. They behave more or less ideally, or what is known as an Ising model in condensed matter physics. So what is a reasonably homogeneous real-world free market society we can think of, okay, of all the various countries? Often people say Scandinavia, okay? And so let's take the country of my friend here, Professor Aslaksen from Norway. Okay, so Scandinavia comes to mind, so let's look at Norway. Given the homogeneity, one might think that society has a chance of perhaps coming close to my theoretical ideal model. So I'm plotting this, the degree of non-ideality or degree of unfairness here over roughly 100 years of income tax data we have for Norway. Okay? If Norway were to be the ideal society, the fairest society, then the income share of the bottom 90%, the actual share will be the same as the ideal share, which means psi should be 0. That means it should lie across this line. Similarly, the top 1% share should be the same as the ideal share, so that also should lie across the x-axis and also the middle tier. Let's see where the bottom 90% is. This is the bottom 90%. They are making less than their fair share because it's negative, it's below 0. But over the years, since 1930, they have steadily improved. And in the last 20 to 30 years, they have approached 0 very close. The average is about 7%, 6 to 7% below their fair share. Okay? The middle 1 to 10%, that's even more interesting. They are converging down, and they are really hugging the fair share. Sometimes they are below, sometimes they are up. Remember, these are human societies. You don't expect them to follow what is predicted by theory very closely because, after all, we are made up of molecules, but we are not molecules. Okay? Molecules will do the same thing every time if F equals ma dictates the molecule that you shall do it. They're all prisoners of Newton's laws. You know, they will go bump against a wall and they are not going to say, oh, that hurt and I'm not doing it again. But try doing it with yourself. You know, somebody bumps into a door, they're not going to do it again. So it is incredible that a human society comes this close to, okay, I think this thing tight, no. All right, so sometimes they're less, sometimes more. The top 1%, they do well no matter where you go. They make more than their fair share. They came down, they went up, and then during the crisis they came down. They make about 100% more than their fair share. But for Norway, the bottom 99% is pretty close to ideality. So Norway has achieved something really, really amazing, which is, as far as the bottom 99% are concerned, they are all being treated fairly, and they're all pretty close to the ideal. It's only the 1% who make much more than what they deserve, according to my ideal theory. So it turns out Norway is not a one-class society, it's a two-class society. There's 1%, then the bottom 99%. How does US look like? Okay, so Norway is like helium. It comes close to the ideal gas. And certainly, if you go there in January, you will feel like helium, right? Isn't it very cold? This is the US, it's the other extreme. Look at the bottom 90%. While Norway steadily improved, in the US, the bottom 90% steadily lost over the same time period. The top 1% has done very well. And the middle tier more or less remained the same. And this is the thing, this is driving the politics of Brexit. This is the thing that's driving the politics. UK has a similar number, and it's driving the politics of the US. But in the US, if you look at the post-war years, 1945 to about 1980, it wasn't that bad. It was not as good as 7% that we saw for Norway here, but not too bad. Now it's 24%, so it's deteriorated a lot. All the other countries are somewhere in between. That's Norway, then Sweden, then we have Denmark, and this is US, UK, and so on. So there are roughly increasing degree of unfairness. Now, immediately after the post-war years, 1945 to 1980, Sweden looked like this. The same three curves, the top 1%, middle, bottom 90%. So, and look at France. So here, Sweden is, the average is about 11%. France, I think, is about 14 point something. And here is a country, 11.6, not bad, almost as good as Sweden, 10.9, 11.6, in fact, better than France. Okay, which country do you think this might be? So that's Sweden, that's France. Which country might this be? Which is somewhere in between Sweden and France in inequality. Any guess? Singapore, we don't have the data for that period. So I would love to, in fact, my class tried to look into that data for that. We have Singapore data for recent years. Well, in the interest of time, you'll be surprised to know that's USA. And that's Norway. It was better than Norway in inequality. It was in between Sweden and Norway. You talk to any American economist, they'll say, oh, Norway, Sweden, Scandinavia, it's all socialist, they're welfare states, nanny states, you get all these, remarks. Look at the statistics for USA. It was almost as good as Sweden and better than Norway. This was like a Scandinavian country from 1945 to 1980. The US did have much better inequality, and they could do it. And but now, if you look at the same four countries after 1980, in the last 40 years, Sweden has improved, Norway has improved, France has remained more or less the same, but America has steadily lost out. It went down from that 11 to 17 over that period, and so on. So USA, has done the right things in the past, and then similarly for UK and other countries. So this theory of mine, which I call statistical teleodynamics, is sort of like a generalization of thermodynamics to people. So instead of 2 laws, we have 4 laws in statistical teleodynamics. And I call it telos, teleo, because it comes from the Greek word telos, which means goal or goal seeking. And so I'm going to wrap up in the next 5 minutes with even a broader picture. So I went from statistical thermodynamics, and by generalizing it, I proposed a theory to explain certain aspects of economic behavior, which I call statistical teleodynamics. And I think it can be even broadened further. And for that, we have to look at what we did over the last 100 years in 20th century science, which was largely reductionist in its nature. That is, we went from macroscopic matter to molecules, then to atoms, then nucleus, then protons and neutrons, then quarks, then maybe strings. That is, we drilled down deeper and deeper. That is what is known as the reductionist paradigm. And in that process, we discovered quantum mechanics, elementary particle physics. We were spectacularly successful. Even molecular biology went down this route and showed how the heredity properties can be shown to be related to structural features, molecular features. Some 800 Nobel Prizes were awarded in pursuing this kind of a paradigm. So much so that the string theories are fond of saying they have the theory of everything. Okay? But can reductionism answer the following question? If I give you the properties of an individual neuron, which we know a lot actually, about a dozen Nobel Prizes have been awarded just to understand that single picture, and then I ask you, well, I'm going to ask you to assemble 100 billion of them, connect them up, wire them up. What will the system behave like? You know the properties here. We know that most of this quite well. Can I predict? That system is what we call as the brain. can I go from neuron to brain to mind? Can I go from parts to system? The answer, is you can't. Despite the claim of theory of everything, we can't do that. Because reductionism cannot answer this question because there's nothing left to reduce. You're not reducing things, you are adding things now. Okay? So at the dawn of the 20th century, around April 1900, Lord Kelvin, after whom the famous temperature scale has been named, gave a very interesting talk at the Royal Society. The title was 19th Century Clouds Over the Dynamic Theory of Heat and Light, where he said, physics knowledge is almost complete, except for two small clouds that remain over the horizon. He said, folks, we know everything about the universe. April 1900, okay? It's almost complete. But Kelvin being Kelvin, had an inkling that there's still some trouble brewing in the horizon, and he saw two small clouds. And these clouds revolutionized 20th century science and our understanding of the universe completely. One is the black body radiation problem, which required the invention or the discovery of quantum mechanics. And the second was the null result of the Michelson-Morley experiment, which gave birth to special theory of relativity in 1905 and the general theory in 1915, thanks to the work of Einstein. In a similar way, I think there is a large cloud hanging in the horizon at the dawn of the 21st century, which is this question: how do you go from parts to whole? For this, we need a constructionist theory of the emergent behavior. Reductionism cannot help us. It's an entirely new ballgame. And it requires a new conceptual synthesis that will finally, when we have it, you'll see that it is connected to artificial intelligence, systems engineering, statistical mechanics, game theory, and of course, biology in the context of brain. So what might such a theory look like? This is the question I've been pursuing since 1983. And in fact, I was trying to develop a theory of neuron to brain, and I ended up doing this economics work because the math took me there. And so I'm nowhere close to answering this question, but it answered another interesting question, which is how much income inequality is fair, which has been an open question, like I said, for a couple of centuries. So the theory to parts system, so I've said a lot of these things, so I'll skip that. So I believe what I'm after is something along these lines. You all know about the theory of everything, which is this grand unified theory, which is at the bottom of all the forces. This is the holy grail in physics right now. This is what all gifted theoretical physicists are after. How do we unify the four fundamental forces at the bottom of the universe, below the micro nano scale, at the scale of Planck's length? And the four forces are electromagnetism, weak interaction, strong interactions, and gravity. They have unified these three, and a dozen Nobel Prizes have been awarded for that work. The one elusive one is gravity. The string theorists claim that string theory has unified all four, but experimental confirmation isn't there yet. But how about unification at the top? How about the theories that can model, explain, and predict macroscopic from micro? So we went down at the bottom, we unified everything. How about unifying going up? Is there such a theory? Or maybe there is no such theory, but it's too early to give up because we haven't even tried, because we've been focused on reductionism for 100+ years. We really haven't done much work in constructionist approaches, so it's too early to give up in my mind. And so that's what I'm after. How do you go from parts to whole? And statistical teleodynamics has some features of that unified theory, because in the same theory I'm able to explain how molecules behave and how people behave under certain conditions. So to summarize, there have been some wonderful books that have come out in the last 6-7 years. Capital from Thomas Piketty, and of course my colleague from Columbia, and this is Tim Scanlon's book. All are wonderful books. You learn a lot from them, very deep insights about the sociology, political economics of all these discussions centered around fairness and justice. But none of them give you a quantitative answer to the question how much income inequality is fair. And my book is the first one to address that question, which came out a couple of years ago. So there are some surprises in this theory. One is people thought this question is an impossible question to answer because Davos, a couple of years ago, put out a blog saying the impossible question, how much inequality is too much? And that's why it has remained as an open question over 200 years. And we have had only qualitative answers from Rawls and Nozick and Dworkin and Sen and others. But surprisingly, we can answer it quantitatively, as I showed, and that there exists a natural level of inequality in an ideal free market society, which can be demonstrated to be mathematically fair. And that fairness turns out to be entropy, and so we've seen all those things, and it's a log normal distribution. The other surprise is that even though Norway, Sweden, and Denmark, they did not know where that fair line lied, they discovered it on their own, empirically, and remained close to that for the last 25 years, not just for 1 year or 2 years. They've done it. So that is amazing that they discovered it on their own, what the ideal income shares are. And so my theory argues for a libertarian free market case. So remember that my theory is actually a free market one. But the outcome turns out to be egalitarian because my free market society actually looks like a Scandinavian country. So the ideal free market that Adam Smith imagined turns out to be what people call as a welfare state actually is the ideal free market state. And so it provides a common intellectual ground, I believe, to connect these two divergent political philosophies. And then it can help us formulate fair tax and transfer policies, CEO compensation, and so on and so forth. So the future work, there's a whole bunch of things that needs to be done. Like I said, these are all simplifying assumptions I've made which need to be generalized. And so how is it being received? I'm reminded of what Mahatma Gandhi said about 100 years ago about political revolutions. So Mahatma Gandhi said, first they ignore you, and now that's happening a lot. Then they laugh at you. They say, this is all ridiculous. What is entropy doing in economics? Then they fight you. So I'm waiting for that. Then you win. And this is what he said about political revolutions, and I think scientific revolutions go down pretty much the same path. And Sigmund Freud said a similar thing. Every new idea in science must pass through 3 phases. In first phase, everybody says the man is crazy and the idea is all wrong. That's where I am at now. In phase 2, they say the idea is correct, but of no importance. In phase 3, they say it is correct and important, but we knew it all along. So my final thought is that if done right, free market can deliver the goods for everybody, not just the top 1%. And my theory suggests what that society might look like as far as income distribution goes. And I'm hopeful and optimistic because of this statement from this famous Israeli statesman. Nations do behave wisely once they have exhausted all other alternatives. I think eventually we find out that what the Scandinavians are doing now, or what the US did between 1945 to 1980, is the place we want to be. I think that will happen in the next 20 to 30 years, thanks to the work of the young folks here, because this is going to be your grand challenge. Thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to take questions.
So if you have any questions, please use the microphones on the side and in the middle. I'm sure there are microphones on the sides so that your questions can be recorded properly. So please feel free to ask any questions. Thank you.
My voice is loud down.
Sorry. Please also introduce yourself.
There's the button here. Okay. My name is Adekunle Adeye. I'm from the Ridgeview Residential College. Thank you very much for your interesting talk, taking us through physics and so on. So my question is, looking at the model you've shown on inequality and the idea of entropy and so on, applying it to economy, I'm not an economist, but looking at it, we live in an interconnected world now. And when you look at various boundary conditions, even the problem you've shown in the entropy, whereby is undisturbed state, there are various external factors that can perturb, and therefore, if countries want to adopt all these strategies, how will this work? That's just the general question I have.
Right. No, that's a very, very important point. Thermodynamically, what I've done is what would be called as a closed system. But most economic systems, as we know, are open systems. There's interactions across borders, like you said, trade, for example, and flow of people. I mean, and that's been part of the problem in EU now, and Brexit is as a result of that. It's the flow of people, and then they're taking up their jobs and that sort of thing. There are ways to accommodate those things. Just in thermodynamics, so my economic model corresponds to 1860s transition from classical physics to statistical physics. Just like that, we need to transition from neoclassical economics to whatever this economics is going to be called, and post-neoclassical maybe. And just like that transition was done, thermodynamics has the conceptual and the mathematical framework and the tools to go from closed systems to open systems, and that's where the work of actually Gibbs comes in, the concept of Gibbs free energy and all that. All those things can be done here. Perhaps not all of them, not all the economic questions can be answered, but many things can be accommodated. And so I haven't done those things yet, but the framework lends itself to that kind of relaxation of assumptions and bringing in more realistic features into the model.
Prof. Venkat, thank you very much you've given so much to think about.
Thank you.
And so much to digest. I'm a political geographer, so it's very hard for me to digest things if society were only a startup, So I'll ask two very simple questions.
Yeah.
One, what is the meaning of contribution in a free market society? For example, is contribution something that makes money for the company, if it is such an idle company? Or is it something that, let's say John is the CEO, makes money for the company. Let's say it's a mining company. Or is it somebody who actually, writes critically about the ill effects of mining or deep sea mining and what that does for the environment? So what exactly is contribution? And if we were to think about contribution in such a manner, how do we factor in privilege that each member in this particular model,
right,
no matter how much mathematicized it is,
right,
is there in the right place at the same, because they deserved it or because there was a system of different kinds of privileges that, that enabled them to be there?
Right. I mean, excellent questions and important questions and also difficult questions to model mathematically. The contribution in this case is the economic aspect of it. So I'm not talking about, you could be, there are people who complain that, look, I work at a job which is of no meaning to me. So I don't get any meaningful reward, but it pays me a salary which pays my rent and that sort of thing. So I'm only looking at purely the economic aspect because a job brings in a variety of other dynamics. You could be doing, we all know of people who take a pay cut to take a job which is much more meaningful to them. So their contribution, they feel that they are adding some value and so on. So those are all very tricky aspects of this, very legitimate and realistic, but harder to model. So I'm only looking at the economic aspect. So the contribution here is whatever you go and work and you offer your services, and for that you are paid an economic reward. And because you made an economic contribution. And it is, so when I say contribution, I mean that economic value added for that company or for that enterprise or whatever it is. And what I'm suggesting is that your salary is actually signaling what that is. And that's why I'm able to use your salary itself as a measure of that. And it's a little more involved. I discuss this in much more detail in the book, and I'm happy to have a sidebar conversation. We can go into this some more, but those are legitimate points. Some of it can be addressed mathematically. Some of them probably cannot be. I know it's probably not a very satisfying answer, but and then
Because you said you were asking for a fight. You said you were waiting for a fight.
Yes. You're right. Yeah, absolutely. No, that is a fair fight too. I mean, those are all fair questions, and those questions do come up.
I do think that it's important when we talk about the 90%
Yeah.
to factor in those questions, because we are coming into the age of the Anthropocene. We are coming into a place where we have human-made environmental destruction that is going to also factor into the 90% welfare. And therefore, if we only think about it in terms of GDP or in terms of economic growth, then I think we're not really looking at the 100% of the 90%.
Correct. And you also raised this issue of privilege, which is very important. So in my classless society, which is the one-class society, they're all equally privileged. The math lends itself to a two-class, three-class society. So in fact, we can reproduce what Norway is seeing. There is a two-class society there, the top 1% and the bottom 99%. The 1% is privileged, and we can model those things. So the privilege aspect we can handle to some extent. The first part of the question you asked, certain things can be done, but not completely. But the thing is, right now, there is absolutely no mathematical tool available to address any of these things from the perspective of justice and fairness and so on, because economists said, forget about those things, let's focus on growth and efficiency. And growth and efficiency is what has given us 40 years of growth we have had, and then we have 40 years of stagnation for the bottom 90%. So by ignoring fairness, this is what we have ended up with, and we have all these issues. And it's not as if I'm talking about a utopia that is pie in the sky, it'll never happen. That's why I showed the Second World War years statistics from 1945 to 1980, where America looked like Norway, better than Norway, a little below Sweden, better than France. I mean, if when people see that you are like France or Norway, it comes as a shock to them, because Americans always feel that there is this American exceptionalism and so on and so forth. Maybe certain aspects of that is true, but at least in sharing the country's prosperity with the bottom 90%, the Americans were doing a much better job in those days. So it's not a pie in the sky kind of thing. We in the sense, as an American, I say that we have done it before, and it's lacking the political will and the business will to do that again. We can do it again. In fact, it is the smart thing to do, because I discuss about the growth aspects of sharing. We give more money to the people at the bottom, the aggregate demand goes up, and so the economy grows actually even faster. So we are losing roughly 1% of GDP growth because of inequality. That's my estimate. 1% every year. And that's a big deal when your economy is struggling to grow at 2%. Adding 1 more % will be fantastic. People will be dancing in the streets if we can do that. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your talk. It was really thought-provoking.
Thank you.
So one of the questions I have is related to your definition of disutility. And you seemed to have made the assumption, at least the way it was presented or the way I understood it, that the disutility of work was inherently tied to the compensation for that work. I noticed that you used Thomas Piketty's data for some of the figures that you used, and he was one of the core proponents of the idea that the rate of return on capital exceeds economic growth, and that often leads to inequality. But for that kind of work, there is really no work. It's a passive income. So how does your model account for income where there isn't actually any additional work being put in, but just being generated as a result of capital ownership?
Right. Again, very good question. This data I showed is all wage income. So there is no capital income, and also this is all pre-tax. So that part of the database from Piketty I use. So this is because that is the one that would correspond to my analysis of free market. And the thing to look at next is the effect of return on capital. And that typically affects the top 1% or the top 3% more so than the bottom 90%. And there is distortion, and that's why the income distributions typically have two regimes. The bottom 90, 95% follow actually log normal, as it turns out empirically, but the top 3% of what is known as a power law or a Pareto distribution, called a fat tail distribution, because a lot of that income is capital income based. And so, and there's no, this disutility doesn't make sense. And then there are ways to accommodate that in the model, which I didn't get into in today's lecture. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, before we take the next questions, I would like to request Professor Florence Ling to come up and pass a memento on our behalf to Professor Venkat. Prof. Ling.
Oh. Thank you very much. Thanks for this opportunity. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah,
Yes,
you
please.
can start your questions.
Hi, good evening. My name is Rama. I'm a PhD student of chemical engineering.
Okay.
I have two questions. The first is, how does the model function taking into account the perception of fairness versus an objective fairness? Like, I think here the more objective fairness was considered. Are there any sort of perception surveys to correlate with that? And the second is a two-part question. I was wondering if you are a proponent of the rights of an individual to compete in a marketplace. That is, what your opinions are about the minimum wage regulations. Do you believe that they serve as a lifeline to those exploited, or do you believe that it serves as an instrument to discriminate against those who can only compete on the basis of a lower wage? That is, freedom to be entropic and engage in chaotic interactions.
Right. Right. So again, very good questions. Let me answer the minimum wage thing. So there is a floor in my model. There is a minimum wage constraint. So when we do this maximum entropy distribution subject to constraints, the minimum wage is there. So I solve it as a mathematical problem. That is, if there is a society given the minimum wage, there is a minimum wage in many countries, including the US. It may not be, and most people think it's too low. It should be, it's roughly $10 an hour now. People feel it should be $15 an hour. So, but given the current value, I use that to make predictions about what the distribution ought to be. Okay, so that doesn't involve making a sociological judgment about whether it should be there or it shouldn't be there, whether exploitative or it weakens people one way or the other, and so on. So, it's treated purely as a mathematical economics problem. Given those conditions, what the distribution should look like. Now, the question you asked, whether there should be a minimum wage or not, that is much deeper question, because you have to look at the sociological aspect of it. There are people who argue, and in fact the Chicago school had argued that there should be no minimum wage, let the market determine. And their argument was, by saying this, you are going to weaken the job opportunities of people at the bottom, because companies won't be able to afford that, and so unemployment may actually go up and all that. But this argument was made when we had child labor in 1800s. If you go back to the Dickensian days of England, and Charles Dickens wrote those novels reflecting the reality of those days. There were children working in factories, children who were 9, 10 years old. And I talk about these things in my book in chapter 7 and 8. Children would work 16 hours and poorly fed. In fact, there are occasions that the children would compete with animals for food in a common trough. And when England tried to pass what are known as the factory laws, banning child labor and restricting hours that employees, these opposition came, oh, this is going to kill the economy, we cannot afford these higher wages and so on. We all know that turned out to be BS. So there are ways to accommodate these things. I mean, clearly we cannot go from $10 minimum wage to maybe $30 minimum wage, but there is enough room to accommodate, make reasonable accommodations. And people are not asking for unreasonable accommodations either. So whether this will be detrimental to the economy and so on. The same argument was made against seat belts. I remember Lee Iacocca of Chrysler making this argument in the 80s. Oh, this is going to add to the cost of the car. We won't be able to sell it. They lobbied and then they killed it for a long time. Now every car has a seat belt and an airbag. So did the car industry die because we added seat belts and car? So you get a lot of these bogus arguments all the time. Many of them often made knowing that they are bogus arguments. So I don't think having a minimum wage or a minimum floor or even this universal basic income that people talk about necessarily is going to kill the economy. I think there are ways of accommodating it and easing them into the thing. And in the long run, they actually turn out to be better for the economy, actually. So these questions have not been well understood, largely because there was often the mathematical models are not that good. Either they are too simplistic or there are none. And so qualitatively, it's hard to argue these things. You have to put some numbers behind those things. So I don't know whether this was the kind of answer you're looking for, but because it is a difficult issue, there are no clear answers. But then my feeling is many of these objections that people raise based on economic grounds that this will kill that industry, this and that. The same thing we hear about pollution now, that addressing the climate change will kill many industries and so on. 30 years from now, this all would have been solved. And looking back, we'll be laughing at the objections, just like we laughed at the objections of seatbelts and airbags. Part of the solution will come from technology, because technology will make these solutions a lot cheaper. Even though it has been contributing to the problem, it will also contribute to the solution. And the political will change. New generation comes in, their cost-benefit trade-offs are different. Right now, we are not accounting for the costs of the climate impact. The next generation, the people who are in the 20s, for example, they are looking at a lifespan of, most of them will live to be 90. So for the next 70 years, the cost of pollution is going to be high and big and real for them, and they'll make a different trade-off. Okay, we'll pay some, to pay some cost towards the pollution to correct it, and then we'll reap benefits in some other ways. So these are complex issues, and there are no simple answers to them. That's my assessment. Thank you. There was another question, right?
Yeah, a perception of...
perception, yeah. So fairness itself is it's a pretty tricky concept. In fact, that's why when you see papers on fairness, often they would have fair in quotes, because it can be subjective, and the perception is an important part of it. But what I'm showing is there is actually an objective base on which the perception might ride on. The objective base is a very simple thing that we all know that, and we have known that for thousands of years. We consider something as unfair when equal things are treated unequally, or unequal things are treated equally. That is the mathematical basis. Any problem you come up with, if you actually analyze it using these two tools, you can see that where the fairness and unfairness comes in. So the perception is, a lot of the perception is because they feel that there are two candidates, they are equally good, but one is favored over the others for some reasons that are not made clear to everybody. That is, there is no transparency. Then the perception will be there that the system is rigged. Okay, so transparency has to be part of all this to make sure that people also perceive that, remember the famous English judge, I think it's Lord Acton, who said, justice must not only be done, but must seem to be done. Because he's addressing the perception part, that people should feel that they are actually getting justice served properly and in time and so on. So the perception versus reality, I think it's really a transparency issue.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, two questions from there. Keep simple.
I think that they're all asking simple questions. It's the answers which are getting complicated.
Thank you very much, Prof.
Thank you.
This is Kiran here. senior data scientist from McLaren.
Okay.
But more than that, I'm happy to say that I was a PhD student of Prof. Lux and student of Prof. Farouk.
Good. Congratulations.
So what all I have learned as a chemical engineering is only one term, driving force. Concentration difference, temperature difference, momentum difference. And driving force is what is really driving this nature.
Yeah.
Nature believes or prefers normal distribution. As a human being, we are preferring uniform distribution, like coming everything close to that zero. Are we going against nature?
No, your driving force idea is actually correct. The driving force here is the utility difference. If you are at a low utility job and you have an opportunity to move to a higher utility job, you will move to that job. The low utility job is the low salary job. The higher utility job is typically a higher salary job. You will switch from here to there unless there are some other constraints such as geographical. Your wife works here and you don't want to go to Malaysia or something like that. So it is the utility gradient. That is the driving force. And in fact, in my book, I make the comparison. It turns out this is not only an analogy, this is actually a mathematically equivalent one. The utility in economics corresponds to the chemical potential in chemical systems. There it is the chemical potential that drives system towards equilibrium. Here it is the utility that drives. So it is the driving force. And except it won't be uniform distribution all the time. It is uniform in the utility. Remember, my utility here, the effective utility is the same for everybody. So it is doing exactly the same as what nature does. In nature, when it equilibrates, when you open up that chamber, the pressure in the left half and the right half, they equalize. That's your uniform distribution idea. Pressure is equal is mechanical equilibrium. Potential is chemical potential equal is chemical equilibrium. Utility is equal, economic equilibrium. It's the same idea.
Thank you, Prof.
Hi.
Hi.
My name is Pranoy, software engineering student.
Thank you.
I have two quick questions. One is that the very terms that you're using, utility, free market, these are very neoclassical economic contributions.
Exactly.
And there's a history of economic historians saying that this has been done before. It didn't work. The economists screwed it up. I fear that you might be moving towards the same path. So I would just like to know what is so different in your work, and maybe a more useful approach would be, let's say, what's happening in market design, where they're looking at how certain markets or how certain configurations of markets lead to outcomes regardless of agent is rational or not rational or is a robot or whatever. And secondly, can
I answer the first question first?
Yeah.
Because by the time you ask your second question, I might forget what the first question was.
Yeah.
So you're absolutely right. The chief idea that came out of neoclassical economics about 100 years ago, largely through the work that was done at Cambridge and so on, was the concept of utility. In fact, they were inspired by the classical mechanics of Newton, and they saw the conservation of energy and all that, and the use of maximum principles in classical mechanics. That inspired neoclassical economics to come up with an idea like utility. And in fact, neoclassical economics has borrowed a lot of ideas from classical physics, so much so, in economic equilibrium, we say a system is in equilibrium when supply and demand forces balance each other. This whole idea of forces balancing each other is a classical mechanics idea imported into economics. But if you're going to borrow, but we know that economics is actually more of a statistical mechanical system because there are millions of agents buying and selling goods and services and so on and so forth. So if you're going to borrow ideas from physics, you might as well borrow from the right place, which is, statistical physics should be the place. Not classical mechanics, but statistical mechanics. But if you borrow ideas from statistical mechanics, and people thought about this 100 years ago, they ran into this 800-pound gorilla called entropy. They ran into the problem that you have to get statistical equilibrium, forces don't balance each other, you maximize entropy, which is maximizing disorder. Oh, but we know our markets work well when there is order. Why would I want to maximize disorder? This has been the conceptual problem for the last 100 years, which goes away in my approach when you realize that entropy really is a measure of fairness. You are maximizing fairness. And then the equilibrium is reached not when the forces balance each other, but when the utilities balance each other. And that's what the outcome is. So the utility actually is a useful concept. It cannot be directly measured. And this has been long debated, and I've followed that debate historically, well accounted in many papers, and I've read many of them. And I'm so aware of the key objections to utility and so on and so forth. But it is actually a useful concept. Even though utility per se cannot be measured, its effects can be inferred through other predictions, such as the one I make, that it should be a log normal distribution, and you can see those things. In that sense, it is a little bit like wave function in quantum mechanics. Wave function in quantum mechanics cannot be observed in reality, but you can make predictions using that, which can be measured, and so on and so forth. So there are times where certain concepts which may not be directly measurable or observable can lead to predictions which can be tested. Your second question?
Okay, we might have some disagreements there. Okay, fine. Second question is, right now, a lot of other people in the same field, whether it's political economy or policymakers, etc., are also trying to make sense of why it's happening, why so massive inequality is happening. One explanation for this is it's just because of skills. The highly skilled are just pulling away from the rest. Now, what they essentially advocate, what they essentially are predicting is what Kurt Vonnegut in the 1960s in the United States predicted in a player piano world. There's just an upper class that earns all the money, does all the work, the whole of society is automated, and the rest are pretty much, they're superfluous.
Right.
Now, I wonder what your role would be in such a society, and hence would like to infer your role here in answering this question of how much income inequality is fair. Because in the Kurt Vonnegut world, it seems fair. It's not that the engineers are causing harm. They've provided all the basic necessities, and the political system is running fairly okay. So would this question, how would you tackle this question?
Yeah, no, it's an excellent question, and again, a very difficult one, and it has multiple facets to it. And some of this I discuss in chapter 8 in my book. The income inequality problem is really a systemic failure of the capitalist system. A systemic failure happens when many things go wrong over a long period of time. They don't happen overnight. Just like the subprime crisis was a systemic failure in the financial system, now this is the systemic failure after capitalist system, and the global climate change is a systemic failure at the level of the planet. And these things happen when several things go wrong for a long, long period of time. And some of those, in the case of income inequality, would be weakening of unions, for example, and globalization, and technology, and managerial power. I mean, all these things, and political environments, all these things contribute. Now, I do agree that you might have a two-class system, and there is one class which will do better than the other class, just for example in the case of Norway. But why should the CEOs get 350 times the average salary of an employee compared to 20 or 30, which the same similar CEOs were making in the 60s and 70s? I mean, what determines, why should that number be 350? Why not 100? Why not 50? There is no answer to these things in economics.
No, but I'm trying to place your work or your field, what you're trying to introduce here, to this debate. How would it be used?
So I'm actually providing a normative.
So
I'm providing a normative theory.
Okay.
I'm saying under ideal conditions, what would that world look like? What would that society look like? In an ideal condition, what should be the share of the bottom 90% of the people in a country in the income pie? And then see whether my predictions are all wild and they'll never be realized in reality, or they seem reasonable. In fact, my numbers, like I said, they come close to Scandinavia, and they come close to America after 1945 to 1980. So my role is to provide a normative model or a normative theory and provide a mathematical basis for it. So it's not qualitative, it's quantitative, it is testable, and then test. You can test the mathematical logic, you can test the logic of the assumptions and make predictions, compare with. So the whole idea is to build a normative model, because right now there is no answer to the question how much income inequality is fair. There's no answer. And so here, this may be a simple answer for a simple system, but that's a start. That's how we started with ideal gas systems, and then thermodynamics advanced to handle more complicated systems. Thank you. I would love to carry on this conversation with you some more, perhaps over email or Skype or something like that, because these are extremely important points, but there are no simple answers to them.
Thank you.
To be fair to the speaker and to the audience, we'll take one last question. And then if you're interested, you can talk to Prof. Venkat if he's free outside. Okay? So one last question, please.
Yeah, thank you for letting me ask this last question. Thank you very much for the very interesting talk. It's given me a lot to think about.
Thank you.
Forgive me if I haven't fully understood, but I wanted to ask one clarifying question that in your final summary, you said that you are advocating for a libertarian free market type solution that would lead to a fair amount of income inequality. But but I was struck by a disjunct in the historical examples you used of societies that did have that fair amount of income inequality, and that post-war the U.S. and Scandinavian countries are anything but unregulated. So yeah, if you could explain.
Yeah, that's a very good point, and it's actually a subtle point which I didn't have the time to get into. So what I'm implying is there is a way and there is a role for the state to interfere in the market process to level the playing field. See, first of all, free market doesn't exist by itself. What is a free market? Free market is a set of rules and regulations that we all agree to play according to what they specify. So the free market doesn't, as Robert Reich, who wrote a book called Freeing Capitalism from the Capitalists, which I strongly recommend, where Robert Reich mentions that there is this notion, at least in the US, that free market exists in the wild, just like the stars and planets exist. You go there and then there's free market. He says, no, free market is created by whom? By the state. Because what is free market? It is a set of rules and regulations about how you can buy and sell products and services. Who makes up those rules? The state makes up the rules. Who is the state? Well, we all create the state by voting and electing people and saying these are the regulations we want. So first of all, free market itself is an artificial entity created by the state. So the state is right there. When you say free market, the state is already there. It is regulated. So secondly, the thing is, we want the state to regulate the free market in such a way that unfair practices don't take place, such as insider trading, collusion, monopoly, weakening the unions and strengthening the rich people. That has been happening in the US for the past 40 years, and the state has been largely not doing anything, in fact encouraging it through the deregulation and all that. So what has happened in Scandinavia, for example, which, as you correctly pointed out, it's a highly regulated one, but the state has interfered in such a way that they have created an ideal free market-like environment. So the result that comes out is this ideal free market. That is, their unions have a say, and they do proper negotiations about salaries, this and that, and there is some curb on CEO pay and so on and so forth. So there is a way for the state to intervene such that the net result is as if this was an ideal free market, because the numbers agree. Now, the state can also interfere in another way. Take the former Soviet Union. There also the state intervened, but it led to a completely disastrous system. So there is a way for state to intervene, and I favor what the Scandinavians have done and what the US did in post-Second World War years compared to what the US has been doing for the last 40 years. And I'm not recommending the central Soviet-style interventions. Does that make sense? But yeah, go ahead.
I think that is very different from my understanding of libertarianism, which is a very hands-off, no government regulation.
Yeah, no, you are absolutely right. The canonical view of the libertarianism, as Nozick and others advocated, or even the Chicago School advocated, is exactly that. And that is the wild, wild west of the 1800s kind of free market. But the thing is, you really cannot have a free market environment without certain rules and regulations. Or else, basically, if you take the purely libertarian view and take it to the extreme, you will end up with a monopoly, because they will exercise all kinds of power to grab the market share and kill the competition, and that will be the one extreme that will lead to, and then that would fail eventually, because finally 99% of the people will rise up with pitchfork and torches, and that's the end of that. So pure libertarianism, one can, I think, prove it is mathematically unstable, because it will lead to a condition where you won't buy the cooperation. You'll have to simply rule everybody under force, and such a system is unstable. And so you will have to bring in rules and regulations in order to make the system stable. And once you introduce rules and regulations, you have a state present. It may be a minimal state, which is what the libertarians would like, but nevertheless, there would be a state present. Thank you.
Yeah. Please join me in thanking Prof. Venkat again. I want to thank the camera person and all the crew here, the sound and lights crew and the recording crew, for their work today. Thank you so much.